what's called Clear Fork Academy.
Clear Fork Academy. That's us.
That's man, that's a substance abuse center for teens, is what I gather. But
Yeah.
that's pretty neat. I've never heard of anything like that. Never, I knew stuff like that existed, but never anything like. Um, I mean, you're the CEO.
Yeah. Started it. Yeah. I started as a therapist 15 years ago and got into treatment and kind of go, I think I can do this on my own.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's really neat. So you don't really see people that care about kids that
Mm.
often, and I'm pretty impressed by that because I've wanted to do stuff like that. Like I've thought about in my head, if I had $1 million or $1 billion, what would I do? And
Yeah.
helping troubled teens is one of the things I would probably do. And to have a CEO such as yourself, and I did a little research ahead of time, but I, to see a CEO and somebody that actually cares, you probably had some experience yourself, and it's
Mm.
very rare for me to see. So I'm pretty impressed by that. So without digging too much into it, we'll go
Yeah.
ahead and start. And
Oh
um,
yeah. Feel free. I they call me a normie in this world because I haven't. I came from it from the clinical side. So I didn't go through and get the t-shirt and the tattoo and all the things. So but there's a lot of, treatment center owners that's their story is that's how they start. They go through addiction and treatment and then come out the other side and want to pay it forward. So
yeah, yeah. Well, I my whole life I've been um I guess I would call a quote unquote normie, but
yeah.
I'm coming to find out in my adulthood that I'm not. And the older I get, the more experience I get, the more I realize how different I really am from my peers. And
Mm.
I never really noticed it before, but I think it had a lot to do with my upbringing. I think it had a lot to do with the experiences that I had as a young child growing up in economic hard times, and not having anybody to talk to. I was alone a lot, and like I'm being tested for autism in March, and my 5 year old has autism, and
Mm.
it's one of those things where I never really thought about things like that before until I started seeing me and my kids doing the same things, and
Sure.
like I'm like, well, maybe that's where they get it. So I'm being tested for autism, and that's so it's very it is very different coming from a background like mine. And like you said, you're coming more from the clinical side. So did you have a whole lot like education wise or
Yeah, I mean, I really thought I was gonna work in the local church. I mean, that's kind of where this journey began. Um, so my undergrad's in pastoral ministries. I grew up in Texas, Fort Worth area, lived in East Tennessee for 8 years, and so undergrad, then went to seminary, and then through working with teenagers, just when a kid catches a house on fire or gets pregnant or gets kicked out of school or whatever, we're not exegeting stuff out of Romans. I'm going, dude, what's going on?
right?
Tell me more about that situation. And so a lot of the counseling classes that I had as electives were just coming in full frame and went back and got my master's in counseling. And so that just kind of started me on that trajectory of psych hospitals and case management and just really working in the industry as a clinician. And I was working with adults. They were 30, 40, 50 years old, and I was inpatient setting. And I was kind of running the whole facility. And there's just this resounding theme of John over here starts talking and he's like, yeah, I said, hey, when did it happen? And he's like, oh, when I was 14. And then Mike pops in. He's like, no way, that happened to me when I was 12. And then, Danny over here is like, I was 16 when that happened. And, so it's like this same narrative with 15, 16 dudes in a room all talking about their adolescent self. And so this idea of a clear fork, man, what if we could change the trajectory of their life at 12, 13, 14? They're not sitting here, right? They're not sitting in this room with a wife, with a kid, with a failing business or a pissed off employer. Um, they don't have the wake behind them if we can do it at 13, 14, 15. So that's kind of the 40,000 foot view of how we got here today is just seeing, that fork in the road for me in seminary, and then, a decade ago going, what if we could do this with kids and prevent some of this carnage?
That's interesting. So you went to seminary school?
I did.
That's I'm not religious at all, but I'm
Yeah,
very spiritual, and the older I get now, it's becoming more apparent to me that yeah, there's something there, but
sure.
I grew up the way I grew up was kind of like a free thinking to be quite honest with you, but like my parents were hippies, and
Yeah,
my mom went to church and I went to church and my family went to church, but it wasn't like we went to church but really didn't live the church kind of life, if that makes sense.
sure.
And so
Yeah.
it wasn't a faithful every Sunday kind of thing, but we attended. And so the way I grew up was kind of believe what you want to believe, and we're going to go
Mhm.
this way. You do whatever you want. And that's kind of my association with religion as a child. And the older I get, I just had that mindset of that there's nothing to it, a magical
Yeah.
being in the sky, but the older I get, man, there's something to it, and I have faith, but I'm not overly religious. So that's very interesting to have to grow up and quote unquote normie, go to seminary school, you go in the clinician side and start talking to young adolescent children and young men about being men and growing
Yeah.
up and having a positive mindset instead of sitting around wondering what to do and going and getting in trouble. I think that's where I failed a lot growing up, is when left to your own devices, sometimes we don't make the best choices.
Yeah.
And I fell into addiction. I fell into, mischievous behavior. I was, drinking when I was in bars when I was 16, 17 years old, parent at 17. So
Mhm.
I kind of lived that life like you're
Sure.
talking about. And those experiences to me and having people around my age to talk to wasn't, I did have friends my age, but I was more hanging out with the older crowd. And I think I got a lot of, you ever heard the expression, you hang out with yo-yos, you're going to be a yo-yo.
My phrase is, show me your friends and I'll show you your future.
There you go. That's a good one. That's a better, kind of a more eloquent way to say
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That's kind of my mentality, raising my kids, is because I had those experiences growing up. I'm kind of like you, where I don't want to see children going down a negative path like that. I'd much
Mhm.
rather talk to them and it's like, what's going on, man? Like, because in my experience, kids don't really have that. Um, they don't really have that intent like adults do. When there's negative
Yeah.
behavior with kids, there's not a whole lot of negative intent. It's like they're
Yeah.
not meaning to cause you harm. They're not meaning to, and it's never personal.
Yeah.
But we as adults sometimes forget that, and
Yeah.
we don't pay a whole lot of attention. And I'd much rather talk to a kid and have a conversation as opposed to, calling 911 or,
Having
you know,
consequences. Yeah. Yeah. You got to build a
yeah.
relationship with them. And once you do that, you figure out like it's kind of we call it a maladaptive pattern of behavior, right? Like it's a clinical term, right? It's this just way I react. You hit me on the funny bone and my knee's gonna do that, it's gonna do that thing. So um
Yeah, and a
yeah,
lot of
so
a lot of sometimes working with kids, it's like they don't know what they don't know, and
right.
so when we take a moment to kind of teach them and say, "Hey, like instead of doing it this way, what I've found in my experience, this might work a little better. And most of the time, like something as simple as, you know, a saying like, you get further with honey than you do vinegar,
Certainly.
something that simple and just try to connect with them. And sometimes I have trouble doing that with my own children. I've got 4 kids, I've got 2 older boys, and they are sometimes the most difficult kids to communicate with because it's like I'm so aggravated, but I love you so much.
Yeah.
But my oldest kid, she's very adaptive and um she's most of the time easy to talk to. I think that I can level with her most of the time. And the older my boys get, they're kind of getting that way. And it's conversations and talking and dialogue is very important. And what you're doing at
Yeah.
Clear Fork Academy, I think that's very important. I've never heard of anything like that. Behavioral health treatment for substance abuse, mental health. I'm just blown away that those things exist, but it's we don't have anything like that around here. We almost an hour north of Kansas City here, and there's nothing like that here, and I'm very impressed. We do need something like that. We do need the that I know of. We don't have anything like that unless it's state run, but
Yeah.
um, we do need stuff like that. Substance abuse is a very big problem among teens, but mostly because of education. They're just not being educated about drugs, and I think sometimes it's those difficult conversations that we don't have that cause the most damage. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, they are being educated, but it's through TikTok and it's through just all the platforms, and so that's their education. And there's not like a true north, being helping them to know when the compass is off. Um, so they are being educated, they are being fed a rhetoric or a narrative of, you can own your own life and you can do what you want, and it's okay to be depressed or whatever those things are.
Man, yeah, it is. I just, man, for me, I think when I was a kid and not having that not having that religious stability, I think that may have been an issue in my life. And I've, as I was doing a little research on you, I came across some things that, like, you often use religion in your teachings, and now that I know that you went to seminary school, it does make sense.
Yeah.
But uh do you find that just having a higher power in general just helps, like you were talking, that true north,
Mm.
does that is true north for you, just not religion in general, just do you find that having something to believe in, just anything in general, and having that true north, no matter what age, is important? Do you think that's important to have as a stable, to be
Yeah.
stable in life?
Yeah, I mean, we have to have a rudder, right? If you think that boat analogy or visual, if there's no rudder, you just get tossed to and fro. You have no choice then. It's like I just wherever the wind blows. If you know, and you get a lot of victim mentality and things like that. Things are happening to me. Oh, the wind blew me over. Oh, the waves are tall. I'm a bit of a control freak. I know that. I like to have a rudder. I like to have some say in where my life is going, and I think faith allows for that, right? Because there's always sort of if you have like a systematic theology, there's a rubric, it's almost a math equation of how life should look. You have the Ten Commandments, or 10 rules to live life, and so yeah, I think it's a lot of people view it as restrictive and seeing those commandments as things I cannot do. But those are really like those are the guardrails. Like those tell me where the limits are to where I don't have to fall off the edge and destroy my life. Um, you know, don't covet your neighbor's wife. Like, uh, that's a good one for me. I'm married. I have 3 kids. I want to maintain some of that. And so having that boundary or rule is helpful. And so it's a good way of living that helps. And I think our kids when we expose them to them, because I think the persona is always like religion is constrictive. I think religion gives some freedom. Like religion gives community, religion gives purpose and value and meaning and substance. And not all of it does. A lot of it's been screwed up and bastardized and cult leader-ish type stuff, right? So there's always those guys. But I think at its core, the intent is to bring about just community, and I think that's how we try to do that on campuses with our kids. Is we're all here. You're all here because of mental health or substance use thing, right? Half of our staff are here because they want to give back because of their own mental health or substance use thing, and that's what makes us unique. That's what makes us also the same.
That's interesting that you say that because that's kind of always how I've looked at it is kind of restrictive and constrictive. And it's very interesting that you put it like that because as the older I get, then I'm finding out that even let's just say even as a control mechanism,
Mm.
religion is a very, very good control mechanism and it's decent and kind and smart and all of those things. And it's not constrictive. And like you were saying, community, that's very important. I'm finding out now when as I get older, I've said that, a handful of times already. And as I get older, I'm finding out how important community really is and how important that village is for
Mhm.
stability, not only in a child's life, but with adults. And I struggle with mental health all the time. And but that's something I like to talk about here on the podcast, mental health. We talk from all about all kinds of things from politics to UFOs. So it's not it's for me just talking and having that dialogue, having a community. I never had a community
Mm.
before. And so I'm kind of using this podcast and platform as a community. And I'm learning now that it's very important for kids to have that. It's very important for adolescents to have people in their lives and not it's interesting that you were talking about TikTok and social media earlier. That's one of my things. Screens it I find that teens they do talk to each other. They do talk. They do communicate, but it's through screens, always through
Yeah.
screens, whether it's video games, chat rooms, social media, Instagram, stuff like that. They are communicating, but you take them to a restaurant and they can't order food.
Yeah.
And that's a problem for me. That's because we're not talking to them. It's not because they're not talking to each other. It's because we aren't talking to them. We aren't giving them a community.
Yeah.
And I am finding that even if you had to go the route of believer or non-believer or religious or non-religious, to for a lack of a better term, it's lesser of the two evils.
Yeah.
Would you rather this or jail? That's one of the and it is not if you really think about it, as guardrails, like you said, it really isn't constrictive. Now,
Yeah.
as I'm working through that speaking, and I'm kind of rambling right now.
No, so
It's
if I can, I'll bring it back because you mentioned sort of this power in community. For me, faith doesn't work in a vacuum, but faith in community works. And it's like it's like you have to experience. I don't know. I'm a musician, so it's like when you experience music, I don't want a $10. These are like super expensive headphones, right? And they plug into to my headphone amp, and I got guitars on the wall over here, so it's an immersive experience. I can play in my room all day long, but music makes so much better sense when I'm on a stage, right? And I got three other instruments playing with me, and now, oh, that guitar line sounds so much more full because the bass is underneath it and because the drums are supporting it. So communities like that for me, because you get to see all the other sort of instruments at play and go, oh, what I'm struggling with or celebrating with is just like that guy over there or that gal over there or that family over there. So to me, they can't be musically exclusive. They have to operate together.
that's it. Do you use music to help reach the kids?
Yeah, we've got, stacks of guitars and drum sets that get beat up and things like that. We'll have occasionally people come in and lead like a special music group or something like that. But I mean, most of our kids are just super creative. Um, yeah, I mean, I've seen them take a pencil and beat on the desk while another kid raps for 20 minutes. And I'm like, I've not said that many words in a month, and you just said it, just rattling them off just as fast as you can think. We have
That's
really talented kids musically.
that's also interesting that you mentioned creativity man, it's if there's a checklist, it's like everything that I deal with in my life, like, is a struggle because of like I find that mental health and creativity go hand in hand.
Mm,
And I live with a bunch of creatives.
yeah.
Like everybody in my wife, my poor wife, she's got the patience of a saint sometimes, but it's like we are all loud and noisy and chaotic, but we can't stand loud, noisy, chaotic. It's so it's very
Yeah.
weird. It's strange, but like music, we've got a young musician in the house. He's 15, almost 15, but he loves to play music, and I think that's an outlet for him. And
Certainly.
so he's not got guitar yet, but he's working on bass guitar. He's got a
Mhm.
viola. I really, really want to get him a drum set for Christmas. Wink, wink. My wife's my editor, so
Oh, there you go.
um, but yeah, I'd really like to get him a drum set for Christmas. And we don't have substance abuse issues here yet, knock
Yeah,
on wood.
sure.
But we do have a lot of mental health issues, and I struggle with trying to reach my children. I can reach other people's children just fine.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I struggle to communicate with my own, and that's part of the reason for the show. And it's very interesting that you're talking about music. You're talking about, like, I'm like I said, I'm not religious, but a very spiritual. I'm not finding as I get older how important it really is to teach kids with structure. And I think that's the biggest part: structure,
Mm,
community, fellowship, all that stuff
yeah.
is right there. And for Clear Fork Academy, I mean, I think you're probably, as a normie, you probably get most of us pretty much,
Yeah, I mean, so I got long hair. I'm a big dude. And I walk on campus and all the kids run up to me. Oh, Mr. Austin, you're the owner. How rich are you? Blah, 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 blah. And the next question is, what drugs did you use? And I say, man, I never used drugs. And they're like, what? how do you own a rehab and you can't even identify with us? And I was like, great question. Tell me about your parents when they divorced. Oh, this and this and this. Um, have you ever had a brother die or a best friend die? Yeah, my friend died of an overdose. He was like my brother. We hung out every day. It's like, okay. Um, have you had money stolen from you? I was like, okay, well, I bet mine has more zeros after it. So I just go through these little life instances that I've had from heartbreak to my brother dying, my parents divorced, being kicked out of a church. What? You kicked out of a church? Yeah. Um, you know, and I'll say, okay, now what do you think is more important that you and I share life experiences or you and I share drug experiences? And they just kind of look at me like, okay, I get it. Because what makes us the same as humans is our life experience, not how we've coped with it. Um, and by the grace of God and his intervention, and because my best friend in high school was the weed man. He literally carried a backpack, and one day he had a brick of weed that was like just giant. And we shared lockers, like we were like right next to each
Like,
other. So I had that friend, and then the other side of I had a baseball friend who went to church, and it was just by his grace that I went with that friend and not that friend. And my life was there was the clear fork in my life way back then of put me on this trajectory today. And so um, I don't know how I got to that story, but
that happens to me all the time. I got
yeah.
raging ADHD. That's why I ramble so much.
I had a,
But
I had a
and
second
that's
cup of coffee this morning for preparation of coffee with Bad Dad, like so.
exactly. And I think that's what really, honestly, like I've got so much going on today, and I really, really didn't prepare for this one as well as I should have. But I'm getting ready to tear apart the studio. I've got so much going on in my mind. It's hard to keep everything on track. And I thought, well, I'll do initial research and then I'll just talk to him. And I mean, this has been a great conversation. And relatability is really key when having a conversation. And I think that,
Yeah,
like when I said you check all the boxes, it's like you do have a lot of life experiences that are probably shared. And for somebody to really kind of have the mental awareness and mental acuity to be like, look, I think I've got a gift. I like talking to people and I like
mm,
helping people, and for to open up a place specifically for kids and helping, like if we can reach them 12, 13, 14 years old at the outset of them having problems, maybe we can reach them and teach them and make it to where they're not quite, such assholes all the time.
yeah,
And that's, I tell my kids all the time when they look at me like, you do this,
mm,
like, or when we see a teacher out in public and they're all like, oh my gosh, that's so and so. And I'm like, well, we're all people.
yeah,
And I use the expression a lot, like, well, they shit like we do. I use that expression quite a bit, or, we all put our pants on one leg at a
yep,
time, you know.
yep,
And it's hard to remember that sometimes. Even with the podcast, I've been starstruck a few times. And it's it's like we're all people, and you have to kind of remember that and try to be relatable as possible. But I find it difficult because I'm always doing that in conversations when people are coming to me just for an ear to yak at
mm,
or a shoulder to lean on. I find myself kind of trying to be relatable, and I'll say, and it almost become like a pissing match. Like
yeah,
I'll be like, well, this happened to me, and this is how I dealt with it. And I don't want to be dismissive of why they came to me in the first place. Do you find that easy in your line of work, or is it more difficult? Or
to be relatable, to
yeah,
connect.
to be relatable and connect and just
Yeah. So, you know,
because we you
somebody
mentioned you didn't
somebody
have any
said,
drug experiences, and when you're trying to relate to kids and trying to, I find it difficult to listen to a kid with or listen to anybody really. It's really anybody,
yeah,
and just be that ear to listen without adding my own kind of
yeah, and I think
twist.
that's
You
where
know what I
the
mean?
for me, I got a master's in counseling, and so I don't have to relate to every situation. I've never had sexual trauma, but over 50% of my kids have. And I don't have to know and experience that firsthand in order to be able to treat it. So I can sympathize or I can empathize with their current symptomology or state, and use the clinical frameworks to help connect them. The relatability is about building trust, and I do that out all throughout the session. I don't have to have a shared experience to build trust, but I can build trust, by using their first name, by having good eye contact, by pausing and not talking over them. Just simple counseling skills and interactions that builds trust throughout the session, and then allowing kind of that clinical technique to help them solve their issue.
I struggle. I also like with my kids. It's just actually this popped up a couple weeks ago. I defend my children's mothers a lot.
Mm.
Um, when my children feel like there's no defense for their mothers, and I'm not really necessarily defending their moms per se, but kind of defending parents.
Yeah, kind of the
Like,
institution of motherhood.
yeah, yeah. When they say, I don't want to give examples because I don't want to call the kids out, but
Yeah.
and I don't want to call moms out either. But without giving specific examples, they'll say things like, "This happened, and I felt this way," and I find myself oftentimes when I that parent brain kicks in when I hear something that I'm like, okay, well, if you understood, I'm
Mm.
empathetic to both sides at the same time. I'm empathetic with the kids, and I'm also empathetic with mom and why this happened. Or mom flipped out and this happened, and I'm like, well, mom probably had a bad day, and I've it's dismissive. And it causes actual problems in my life, because they're like, well, you defend so and so. And I'm like, I'm not trying to project on you how you should feel. I'm not defending. I'm just understanding. This happened, yes, but mom's still a person.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
I mean,
yeah, I struggle with
teenagers
that
see
all the
about
time.
this much. Uh, and when you become a parent, parents, I love when they say, I can't wait till you become a parent, like, but it's true. It's really true. You see a broader perspective of life when you're on the other side of it.
It is, that's a good way to put that. It's like you took the thought right out of my head. It's it, it it is really different experiencing it from the other side. You have kids yourself, right?
Yeah, 8, 10, and 12-year-old. Two girls, and my oldest is a boy.
That's awesome, man. And I find that when my children are coming to me, and I don't like the saying, because I said so, or
Yeah.
I do find myself saying that sometimes just out of irritation, but I don't like it. I like to explain the why and the how, and
Yeah.
especially if they're curious enough to ask. And I think that's also important. Do you find that in your line of work, do you like to explain the whys? Do you like to,
Oh,
if you instead of just telling them, okay, this is what we do you like to explain to them, this is what we do and why?
100%. And that's from the owner and CEO like role, like when we make a systemic change within the organization and within the counseling environment. Simon Sinek wrote the book Start with Why, and that's just how we're motivated. The why, speaks to a different part of the brain. When we make actions and do things, it's not a real frontal lobe cognitive response. It's generally an emotion based kind of thing. So when we understand the why, we'll run through brick walls. Question I think I like coming back to is just like how do we do treatment? Because we have just kind of a really unique approach to doing treatment with faith integration and how does that look like and we're as clinical as a hospital but we're relational as a youth camp and we kind of smash those two things together, um, just kind of out of my history and background. And so everybody's favorite subject is to talk about themselves. you know um, so yeah, I think that's like being able to kind of narrate about our programming, I think is the um I guess my favorite question. I don't have this like I wish they would ask me this. Because I mean I've talked about technology, we've talked about family systems, we've talked about trauma, we've talked about grief, like whatever kind of the I think I got one coming up that's just like all bipolar and non-pharmaceutical interventions. 'Cause I'm a kind of a naturopathic driven person. We use medicines on campus, but I see them as a real short-term intervention. And so uh,
I do too. I kind of like, I'm not really a holistic kind of guy, but if we can do without the chemicals, I'd rather do that
for
because
sure.
to be honest with you, like I think there's nothing wrong with people. I think I think it's society itself. I don't think we need medications to manage ADHD. We need to give the ADHD kid a job. That's what we need to do. We
Yeah.
need to we need to let him do what he wants to do. Like, why do we are so focused on consumerism and just of that, and that's what I like to talk about. I'm so different in the aspect that I do understand it and I like consumerism and all that stuff. I prefer people to be happy, man. I
Yeah.
really do. And I don't think that we need substances. I don't think we need to give kids mind altering drugs to help them. I really don't. I don't see the point in it. I mean, I've talked about like my kids use medication. Um,
Mhm.
my son, I can't, my 14-year-old son uses I can't remember the name of it, but it's ADHD medicine,
Yeah.
and I don't like it. He gets okay grades.
Mhm.
It's not like he doesn't get decent grades, and he's really smart. He just can't sit still. He can't
Sure.
focus. And I do understand the importance of education, right? But I don't know why we have to make them sit down. I don't know why we have to make
Oh,
them sit still.
yeah. So we could talk about the education system forever. My wife taught, she was a teacher, taught for 10 years or so, and it's the most broken institution in the world, and we're just perpetuating, this massive dumbing down of America. I'm super
Yes,
passionate.
yes.
We homeschool for a reason. Instead of my wife spending 1,000 hours a month, teaching other people's kids, we're investing in three really good humans. And hopefully, they take care of me when I'm old. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, the only reason we don't homeschool, I think I don't have any confidence in myself to be able to teach.
Oh, I couldn't do it
Um,
at all. My
yeah,
wife's the genius on that end.
and the only things that we have available resource wise that we can afford is public education.
Yeah.
For so homeschooling public education for homeschooling. It's
Hmm.
not terrible, but then we're doing the same things that we're like, they're always going to be on a screen. Somebody else is going to teach them just like they're at school, but
Yeah.
only at my house through a screen. I don't want that. I would much
Yeah.
rather the public education system. But the way the American education system was designed was to create workers. It
Mhm.
was never meant to educate, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
not really educate, just educate them enough to where they make a bunch of shit. That's
They can
what
work
we
at the
do.
factory.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we educate them that way, but educators somewhere along the line have taken the educator role to heart, meaning and the parents have become so uninvolved that they drop
Mm.
their kids off expecting education about not only math, science, reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's the parents just drop them off and expect them to teach, life lessons, and
Yeah.
and they're not teaching them how to think. They're teaching them what to think.
Correct.
And I do agree. It's
Not
so
even think,
broken.
but to regurgitate, right? Just
Yeah,
what to
exactly.
regurgitate. It's not even a thinking, um, and now that we have, ask Google or Alexa or Siri, like all you do is just ask the device and it tells you the answer. So you don't even, again, another level of not thinking or having critical thinking skills. Um, yeah, so again, it's broken, and I think that's why I have a job, right? Is because a lot of these um, probably really creative, entrepreneurial kids are bored to tears, and they got to do something, right? And left to their own devices, they're going to do dumb things. Mom and dad are both working two jobs or something, probably, and if they're not raising the kids, the world will, and the world's full of just dumb stuff that kids don't need to be doing.
Yeah, man, I think we got to go backwards in education for real. I mean, I think if we foster the makers of the crap, the manufacturers, if we foster those people, but we also like, you know, all the kids with IEPs, if we just take those kids and actually IEP them,
Yeah,
individual education plan, if we actually do that and treat them as individuals and like let them create whatever they want to create, and sometimes we have those IEPs for obvious reasons, like um obvious huge mental deficiencies, but
yeah,
and physical disabilities, obviously. But we also we also give a bunch of kids, Ritalin and stuff, and like tell them sit down and shut up, and exactly what you
yeah.
said, regurgitate. I think if we go back like the 70s and 80s, physical education was really important. Uh,
Sunlight.
yes, it's sunlight, history, math. They focused on those things, and science, obviously. Where's all that shit gone?
Yeah,
It has. We do have little geniuses running around. They are smart. They're just smart in different ways.
yeah,
And I think if we could give them more of a practical education, I do think that starts at home. And
yeah.
the I just talked about it with a different guest a couple of days ago about uh the nuclear family, keeping the nuclear family together. And that's
Hmm.
something else that faith and religion helps with,
Hmm.
is keeping the family together. And I think that's very important. We have a blended family, but my wife and I've been together for 18 years, and our
Wow.
relationship is older than our kids. We were together, goodness, we were together 3 or 4 years before we had our first kid. So we had that time to get to know each other and decide whether we wanted to be with each other long term before we had kids.
Yep.
And once we had kids, it was like Okay, now we've built a life together. We're angry with each other, but we can't give up because I love you and you love me. And not only is it us, but we also have kids to think about now. And it's wild to me how the education system does not encourage the nuclear family. You know,
Right.
we wouldn't need to bring religion back to school if they would encourage the nuclear family. But instead of encouraging it, they discourage it openly.
Yeah.
It is wild to me. And then wanting to take away parents' rights, and it's insanity. Like here where I live, we're dealing with compulsory law issues.
Hmm.
The city in which I live has an independent school district, and of course it's state funded and federally funded, but it's a huge district, and they have like an operating budget for like $16 million, and they're consistently behind. They're
Yeah.
consistently, it's ridiculous. And we've had federal investigations and stuff like that. FBI has busted them embezzling millions of dollars, and it's wild that that stuff happens. But the parents aren't allowed to be in the schools. We have to have
Right.
special permission to be in the schools. They're locked down all the time. I have to ring a doorbell to get in. And if my reason to be there isn't good enough, they'll keep my kid in the building and won't let me in. That's wild to me. I don't understand all that.
Yeah.
um, you would figure that they would encourage parents to be more active in the kids' educations, because it's what we're lacking as active parents. Like they don't, it, like you said, that's the reason why you have a job, is because
Mhm.
as parents we're kind of slacking a little bit. And I remember back in the late 80s and early 90s, I walk out the door, my neighbor could talk shit. My neighbor could say, correct me
Oh yeah.
in front of my
Yeah.
parents. Hey, you little asshole, knock it off, in
Yep.
front of my parents. And my parents would just, whack me upside the head. Yeah, quit it. You know,
Right.
um, I think that the community aspect is gone. And I think the public education system is partly responsible for that, and government intervention into lives of parents. I think that's partially the problem.
Yeah. Well, and kind of go back to the ideology. I mean, the way to control someone is to fragment that nucleus. And so you isolate a person, they're easy to
Divide and
control.
conquer.
Divide and conquer. It's is the oldest technique of control, and we can be conspiracy theorists, or whatever. But there's the big business side of education, and then there's this like undertones of communism or whatever you want to call it, to create widgets, dumb widgets that you can put in a factory line, and you know,
That's interesting that you mentioned communism, because it is, in my opinion, about around the time it started was around the time the Soviet Union fell. And ideological subversion is exactly what this looks like to me.
yeah,
It looks like foreign intervention. And I think we need to take our lives back. We need to take our kids back.
yep,
And we, no matter what happens, though, I think we're going to be okay as long as there are people like you and
oh
I
for
out
sure,
there,
for sure.
reach one, teach one. And what I'm afraid of is the generations coming up aren't going to be able to afford to be good citizens.
Mm,
You know, um,
yep,
Gen Z right now is dealing with a hell of a crisis, housing crisis, jobs. Um, my 20-year-old son has difficulty seeking and keeping a job of substance. Um, no matter how we tell him, like how we try to coach him, of course we can't be there to hold his hand,
yeah,
and we can only take it so far. And I find just getting an interview is difficult. at a reputable place. But then you go to the interview and it's like they don't want to help because there's no experience. And
Hmm.
they're like, well, how do I get experience? You
Yeah.
know, how if you won't let me, how nobody will let me without the experience. Like I don't get it how we're
Let
supposed
me
to.
ask, because I'm an employer, we have 130 people. Is he looking for an entry job, or is he looking at like a uh, manager job? Like I'm
As
always
far as I know, he's looking for all of the above. Like
anything.
as far as I know, he's not looking for managers experience jobs or anything like that. But we have a lot of manufacturing around here,
Okay.
and he's looking for factory work. He'd love to go into a factory, but the thing
Wow.
is, like, he doesn't have the experience to get in, and all of his job history is from like a restaurant, or
Right.
he worked at this place for 6 months, and he
Hmm.
can't really get his foot in the door anywhere to.
Wow.
And I wonder, like, I often wonder if it's because, like, so we live in a digital world. All the applications are online, and when I was teaching him how to fill out job applications, it was on paper.
Yep.
And that's all I've done my whole life. And as soon as it went digital, and I had the same problem, I put in like 500 applications and got back like two phone calls
Mm.
and one interview out of 500 applications. I quit looking,
Yeah.
and I started being a stay-at-home dad. Like, and that was 10 years ago. And now it's so difficult. We live in a there's like 75,000 people here.
Okay.
And of course, we have small towns all around us. So a metro area of give or take 100, so it's not a huge area, but there's enough jobs to go around,
Yeah.
and there are enough open jobs. It's just so ridiculously hard for young children to find
Yeah.
jobs. And I think
Well,
that they get the reputation of we don't want to work.
right.
I think a lot of people discount Generation Z specifically because they are different. They didn't grow up in the same world. And so,
Yeah.
like
Maybe let's overlay maybe for a second this idea of community. I got my first job because I knew somebody, right?
yeah,
And
yeah, I did
everybody
too.
I know who's had a good job, it's not because they had a great resume or they showed up in the interview time. It's because they knew somebody. And there's we're in Texas, so there's kind of a joke like if you wear the Aggie ring, when you graduate, you get an Aggie ring, or and all you have to do is just flash that thing when you walk in the door, and you just get VIP seating, like so it's again going back to the I guess we could be racial here. Like, go look at Jewish communities as a case study. I think the dollar turns over like 15 times. Meaning, I'm a Jewish person. I go to the Jewish deli, and then that person takes that dollar and goes to the dry cleaners, and then the dry cleaner goes to the car dealer. They're all Jewish, and that dollar will turn over like 15 times. Where in America, or like white Americans, it's like a 0.5% of times or something like that. It's like, so thinking and looking at like the communal systemic success or failure, right, is based on community, based on
That's an interesting example. I've never really thought about it like that, but you're exactly right. Like, we try to buy local as much as possible. And like my kids order online. And I'm like, stop doing that. Like, if you
yeah.
ever went to the damn store, oh, it just makes me so anxious. And I'm like, so what? That's a reason to do that.
Oh yeah.
Like you are like, you're buying all this stuff online, and then when you get it, it's not what you think it was, or it's
Mhm.
not the greatest product, or it's not. what you needed, when you can go right to the store and find the same crap, usually cheaper,
Mhm.
or if you can't get it cheaper, you're still buying it right now. There's that instant gratification that you can go right to the store and get it. And I try to explain it that way, but it's some for
Well,
whatever reason it doesn't
but you
work.
have a relationship with the person you bought it from. And
Exactly.
that's the communal aspect that when I go to a job, like my 8-year-old, we make her order her own food everywhere we go. We go to a restaurant, she orders her own food. So does the 10-year-old, so does the 12-year-old. And we've been doing that since they could speak because and people are like floored when we go out to eat. They're like, wait, she's gonna order for herself and she knows that she doesn't want pickles and tomatoes and the order comes out completely right. Because my 8-year-old has the vibrato or the know-how to do basic things. And I know that seems rudimentary, but when she puts out an application and she goes to a job interview in 10 years, maybe 5 years, that person's going to go, wow, that was a good handshake. She looked me right in the eyes, and she has a little bit of swagger walking in here because she's been talking to adults for 10 years of her life.
Well, we've always, I'm sure you've heard the saying, I want what I want when I want it.
Sure. I have 3 kids.
Yes, if we teach, like, there is a positive side to that. There absolutely is a positive side. I want what I want when I want it.
Yeah,
And my solution to that is, all right, go get it, you know?
100%.
And that's that's it's awesome that you ask your kids can order their own food, because like that's one of the things that drives me nuts, man. Like like I need to choose my own food. I don't want to think about you. I don't want to think about your food. I'm stressed out that I have to pay for it, so like,
Sure.
you get your own food. I'm gonna decide for myself, and most of the time I'm like, I ask my wife, like, what are you getting, like, because I might want to get what she's getting.
Yeah.
It's so funny. But yeah, that's awesome that you do that.